Buongiorno a tutti. Buongiorno a tutti voi presenti qui nell'aula magna dell'Università Lateranense. Permettetemi di presentare in modo particolare Sua Eminenza, Cardinal Gualtiero Bassetti, Presidente della Conferenza Episcopale Italiana. Siamo contenti di poter averle tra di noi. Ovviamente saluto tutti coloro che in questo momento sono collegati con noi via streaming. La presenza in rete è abbondante, siamo molto contenti. Dopo la giornata di ieri, piena, desideriamo riprendere questo convegno oggi sul tema la sapienza della croce nella promozione dell'umanesimo e del dialogo interreligioso. Prima di presentare i relatori, prima di iniziare, ovviamente desideriamo, come lo faremo ogni giorno, e l'abbiamo fatto anche ieri, iniziare con un momento di preghiera. Oggi sarà in inglese, ecco, possiamo, se possibile, ci alziamo per questi minuti di preghiera. La preghiera è alla pagina 42.
On this second day, we reflect on the wisdom of the cross and the promotion of humanism. Today's world is becoming more and more multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. We live in a complex world that is assailed by many crises and at a time marked with the COVID-19 pandemic. We long for the renewal of humanity. Human solidarity and responsibility can and must help us to find a planetary humanism that is marked above all by peace and cooperation between nations.
O wisdom of the cross of Jesus, source of hope and vigilance, source of discernment and evangelical audacies. Make us O wisdom of the cross of Jesus, guide us in the widest political and educational choices, because every human, evaluating her being and her person, can build a new humanity founded in the evangelization of love and tolerance, on respect of nature and love of creation, and the one does not separate the biological from the human. Thanks, Father. Accompanies in the formation of the planetary consciousness and the community. Move the plantation of the closure and resistance of All together. So that we may all enjoy the fruit of grace that mature in the heart of the redeemed and reconciled humanity. Amen.
Dunque, ancora una volta un grande saluto a tutti voi che siete nell'aula magna dell'Università Lateranense, tutti voi che siete in streaming. Iniziamo questa mattinata sul tema La sapienza della croce nella promozione dell'umanesimo e del dialogo interreligioso. Ancora una volta saluto tra di noi con molta cordialità e amicizia Sua Eminenza Cardinal Bassetti, Presidente della CEI, e siamo anche grati per quanto vorrà dirci in questo momento. Grazie, Eminenza.
Si sente? Ecco, grazie. Carissimi padri passionisti, padri generali, illustri relatori, carissimi amici e amiche, volentieri porto il mio cordiale saluto al Congresso Teologico Internazionale in occasione del 3° centenario della fondazione della Congregazione della Passione. Il sottotitolo della giornata odierna, La sapienza della croce nella promozione dell'umanesimo e del dialogo interreligioso, ci dà modo di percepirne la bruciante attualità nella situazione culturale del mondo occidentale. Il cambiamento d'epoca che stiamo vivendo riguarda non solo l'avvento dell'era digitale con i nuovi rapporti, le variazioni economiche e sociali delle strutture organizzative universali, ma interessa l'identità dell'essere umano. È in corso il fenomeno descritto cambio antropologico. Sta nascendo un'umanità nuova, da cui scompaiono le sensibilità tradizionali e la certezza dei valori. Umanità che mentre da un lato è definita liquida e oscillante senza prospettiva di stabilità, dall'altra osa presagire lo stato in cui i cervelli umani saranno unificati da interconnessione digitale. In questa io e l'ateismo dell'indifferenza che dimenticano il creatore rischiano di dimenticare anche i valori umani. L'umanesimo che esclude Dio è un umanesimo disumano, come troviamo scritto nell'enciclica Caritas in Veritate. Sarebbe altra cosa dal progetto creativo di Dio. Non si può permettere che l'umanità precipiti in simile stato di deformazione. La rivelazione biblica dimostra fin dall'inizio che Dio si è fatto presente nella storia umana, ha ascoltato il grido del popolo, è intervenuto anche in modo clamoroso, con mano potente e braccio teso. Basta pensare alla vocazione di Mosè, al roveto ardente. In qualche modo Dio risponde a tutte obiezioni che si agitavano nella testa di Mosè. Ma Dio c'è davvero? Ma Dio ha cura del suo popolo? Ma Dio sarà capace di liberarci? E le risposte che arrivano sono precise. Ho udito, vuol dire che io sono un Dio che ha orecchie, ho ascoltato e ho deciso di intervenire, poi tu sarai il mezzo di questo intervento. Dunque un Dio che vede, un Dio che ascolta, un Dio che prende l'iniziativa. In questo impegno di promozione umana, a partire dal salvaguardarne l'identità, il dialogo con le religioni può offrire un contributo determinante, come di fatto sta avvenendo a sostegno dei valori della pace, giustizia, uguaglianza, solidarietà, fraternità, parità di genere, sostegno dei bisognosi, difesa del creato. In ambiente italiano, tale collaborazione si attua in prevalenza a livello di gerarchia. Ecco, l'ecumenismo purtroppo è ancora troppo a livello di gerarchia o di addetti ai lavori, ma diventerà esperienza sempre più di comunità con l'aumentare anche in mezzo a noi della presenza di altre religioni tramite l'immigrazione. Pensando alla tematica di questo congresso, si deve osservare che lavorare per la promozione umana in nome della sapienza della croce è specifico della religione cristiana, non solo dei passionisti, ed è anche suo specifico contributo all'interno del dialogo con le religioni. È anche la motivazione più potente e sconvolgente su cui questa assise potrebbe offrire nuovi orizzonti e prospettive. Molto ci attendiamo da questo vostro convegno. Chiunque appartenga alla razza umana può essere mosso interiormente e coinvolgersi nella promozione dell'essere umano, che come credenti chiamiamo la salvezza eterna. In nome della fede e del battesimo vi siamo implicati ontologicamente e strutturalmente. Viverlo nella fede significa fondare le nostre motivazioni sulla sapienza della croce, che rende capaci di camminare a fianco, di farsi prossimo nell'attitudine del buon samaritano, con umiltà, discrezione, in ogni sforzo in cui la sapienza umana cerchi soluzioni, senza competere con nessuno e rispettando le conoscenze e le acquisizioni delle varie articolazioni della sapienza umana, dobbiamo condividere quello che abbiamo ricevuto in spirito di solidarietà con tutti i fratelli, con tutte le sorelle e con la creazione. Siamo ben consapevoli, come spesso ci ricorda Papa Francesco, che non siamo più nella cristianità. Oggi non siamo più gli unici che producono cultura, né i primi né i più ascoltati, e di questo bisogna prenderne atto. In questo periodo il mondo plurale e globalizzato si trova unificato nell'avvento cosmico che ha dimostrato non la forza, non la potenza, ma la debolezza e la fragilità del tutto. L'umanità, crocifissa dalla pandemia del coronavirus, molti su questa croce sono morti e a livello mondiale si parla di milioni di creature, ma tutti vi stiamo parzialmente morendo. Io stesso penso d'essere sopravvissuto quasi miracolosamente da come la malattia si era accanita nei confronti della mia persona. Si vede che il presidente della CEI le aveva fatte grosse, allora il virus si era accanito ancora di più. Ma tutti dobbiamo risorgere, sia per la capacità rinnovatrice impressa dal Creatore nel cosmo e nell'essere umano, sia per la potenza della fede che è partecipazione alla resurrezione di Gesù. L'evento ci trova colpiti, ma anche uniti nella ricerca di senso e nel bisogno di aiuto. Nessuno si può salvare da solo, siamo tutti sulla stessa barca. Ricordate la passeggiata solitaria in piazza San Pietro sotto quella pioggerellina, quando poi andò nella basilica e disse: siamo tutti sulla stessa barca. Abbiamo bisogno di accogliere e di rinnovare la consapevolezza che nella storia umana e sulle sue vicende domina ancora e sempre l'amore di Dio. A un mondo ridotto in queste condizioni dobbiamo avere il coraggio di annunciare il Dio crocifisso come noi, che ha saputo transustanziare il dolore e la distruttività della croce nell'amore che si dona per gli altri, che preferisce il bene degli altri al proprio, che perde la vita per realizzarla nell'amore. L'amore che muove Dio a farsi dono per ogni essere umano e spinge i credenti ad essere dono reciproco, specialmente per i più deboli e abbandonati. La tensione naturale che rende l'essere umano realizzato solo attraverso il dono sincero di sé diventa scelta libera e passione incontenibile nel nome del crocifisso risorto. Svolgeremo questo compito come missione della Chiesa in uscita, nell'annuncio prima e permanente offerto con il comportamento e la parola, il kerigma, che Papa Francesco ci ha proposto in termini vicini alla nostra sensibilità, soprattutto pensate all'Evangelii Gaudium, alla Laudato Si, alla Fratelli Tutti. Non ci mancano gli input e i messaggi del Magistero della Chiesa. Dice Papa Francesco: Gesù Cristo ti ama, ha dato la sua vita per salvarti e adesso è vivo al tuo fianco ogni giorno per illuminarti, per rafforzarti e liberarti. Evangelii Gaudium 164. O anche il kerigma per i giovani: Cristo vive, ti vuole vivo. Per quanto ti sia allontanato, accanto a te c'è il risorto che ti chiama e ti aspetta per ricominciare. Bello questo messaggio, giovani, dopo il sinodo dei giovani. Christus vivit. Se qualcuno deve essere in prima fila, questi sarà, come in tutti gli aspetti della missione della Chiesa, la vita consacrata. La vita consacrata. E nel caso specifico, i religiosi della passione di Cristo, che fanno del mistero
of Jesus, the unity of their life and their apostolate. So also the religious family with the same task. What in the church belongs to everyone can become particular mission of specific communities, and this is your charisma. As bishop in different churches, first I've been to Massa Marittima, Piombino, Arezzo, Cortona, San Sepolcro, and then Perugia, Città della Pieve. I've been there since 24 years that I've been bishop. I've always been aware that I was responsible of the welfare of the consecrated life in the diocese. And in any case, the believers of my communities have been enjoyed over the charism of Passionists with my great joy and gratitude. So allow me to say it's just a little sorrow, unfortunately, at present, and I'm telling it with so many sadness, the presence of Passionists in my diocese of Perugia, that is city of the Pieve. I look forward, Monte Scosso, and I say, well, maybe one day what God has chosen for me. Anyhow, the Italian Church and also the Universal Church is grateful to you Passionists because you are keeping alive the awareness of the love for God, for humanity, of the crucified Son and risen Son. Also with their community life in the last 10 years, they have been working also promoting international congresses upon the wisdom of the cross. And this is the fourth, if I'm right. I do wish to all of you that you can really produce results, good results in the church, that you will call one with the other Policarpo, just because we are in such a difficult time for all of us, for the world and for the church. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Grazie, grazie di avermi invitato.
Thank you for those words that have not been just a greeting or an introduction to the team, but it has been just an introduction to a horizon that could be the one of our meeting, the importance of an overview which is able to choose the great project of the new mankind, and at the same time the research of the Christian point of view, and the same time something that can be respectful for the others. And I would say that invitation to the Paschal Mystery, that could be a balm, because the charismatic spiritualities represent a living page of a mystery of the life of Jesus. The Paschal Mystery, by considering the congregation of Passion of Jesus Christ, wants to be represented by those men and those women. So the invitation to consider, to focus, and to look at the point from which the identity comes from, and the size of every dialogue. All this has been said, and we want to thank you so much. Certainly, the friends, brothers, Passionists have been glad just because the recalls that concern their congregation. So this morning has been introduced very well. Thank once again. And now we have to leave you because Her Eminence had other commitment concerning the Italian Church. This recalls also the Episcopal European Conference that will be in Villa Aurelio for a few days. So, since I am the president of the Italian Conference, I've been invited. So, as in all the families, well, I have the task of welcoming the participants. And I wish you a good wish for the meeting. I could read all the agenda, and I see that it is a very important matter for your religious family, but with all consecrated that for all the church. Because when in the church someone is growing and is well, we are all well. So I will embrace you all. Goodbye and thank you.
Con questo un grande abbraccio e arrivederci. Grazie.
And now we will change our clothes in a certain way. thank you for this gift. After this moment, introductory moment, we would like to start our working morning, today's working morning, and in this moment should have been here together with Isabel Pereira Varanda. I salute her kindly. The Cardinal Miguel Ángel Ayuso Guixot, the President of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, due to his commitment and to a commitment coming directly from the Pope, cannot be present. And another person that can be representative for the interreligious dialogue, also due to his pastoral experiences that he had in Cairo, and also being responsible for important institutions of the interreligious dialogue. And because the Cardinal could not be here, he gave the task of having his presentation, he gave to Sembrano Lucio, Cardinal Sembrano Lucio, to have his presentation. But because another commitment came for the substituted Cardinal, the Cardinal right now is at the airport because he had to participate in another event. Right now, we will listen to the presentation he prepared, and you can follow it via video. And the topic is the wisdom of the cross and the promotion of economic promotion. So I do hope that we can follow pretty well, and of course all the listeners that are connected around the world. So I kindly ask to follow the video. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank the Passionist Father, in particular Professor Fernando Taccone, for the powerful commitment that the organization of this extraordinary meeting. In the name of His Eminence Cardinal Miguel Ángel Ayuso Guixot, President of the Pontifical Council for the Interreligious Dialogue, that has delegated me to represent our dicastery. Eminences, Excellencies, Reverend Father, Brother, and all of you that are present, connected with social media, I would like to start from the two conciliar documents that mostly present the perspective of integral humanism, Gaudium et Spes et Dignitatis Humanae, to show how they are truly imbued and enlightenment by the wisdom of the cross, which is the general theme of this conference. Gaudium et Spes, the conciliar constitution on the church commitment, and Dignitatis Humanae, Declaration of Religious Freedom, both promulgated by Pope VI on the 7th December 1965, are the reference framework of our speech. The ground has already been prepared in the first half of the 20th century in France by the integral humanism by Jacques Maritain, dear to Pope Montini, and by Personalismo Emmanuel Mounier, whose cultural fragments were received and assimilated by the conciliar father. For Paul VI, the mission of Church takes the name of dialogue, colloquium salutis, opening to the others to discover the values, to work together, to cooperate for justice and peace, means bearing witness to the fullness of truth of life that as Christian we contemplate and receive from Jesus. The urgency of dialogue between church and the world that has increased in the following decades found a response in the teaching and witness of the pontiffs to the point of developing an original theology and practice of the intercultural dialogue, which is the main road of the communities. But let's look at the situation as described by Gaudium et Spes. According to the Conciliar Father, the cultural changes can provoke in some a purification of the religious experiences, another a lack of orientation, which is a detachment from deletion. And it's a new phenomenon which is presented as a need of the scientific progress or new type of humanism. Gaudium et Spes says that today to link God to religious is not something unusual and individual. It is a real revolution, cultural revolution, that affect in the field of letters, science, interpretation of human science, history, the same legislation. The living condition of modern men from the social and cultural point have profoundly changed, so it is legitimate to speak of a new epoch of human history, Anthropocene, to indicate the macroscopic effects of anthropization about the environment. The Council already sensed the extent of what we call globalization. In fact, they talk about the industrialization of urbanism, the causes that cause a mass culture, a new way to act. The Council thinks that the new form of human culture promotes the unity, but respects the particularity of the different cultures. And it is to this new atheistic or religious humanism which distorts human dignity and the balance of relation between man and the creation, that the Church responds by reproposing the centrality of Christian humanism rooted in the Paschal Mystery. The new humanism proposed by the Council is defined by the responsibility of man towards his brothers and towards the history. Many other contemporaries think that if those links are too near between activity and religious, the autonomy of man is avoided, but it recognizes the Council at number 37 of Gaudium et Spes, the creature disappears without God. The word is opaque. And this brings back to the drama of atheism that has in the Council that the Church engaged in the forefront with the different initiatives at the chair of non-believers conceived by Cardinal Martilli and Cortile de Gentili at the Dicastery for Culture. The eschatological hope does not diminish the importance of earthly commitment, but rather gives new reason to support their implementation. Indeed, the Church has the task of making God and Father in this incarnate Son present and almost visible. If the religious basis and the hope of eternal life are lacking, human dignity is damaged in a very serious way. And we can see here the guilt of a pain remain without solution, and each man doesn't solve his problem. So, the Conciliar Father says that the vocation integrated of service towards humanity is a human and religious mission together. Faith illuminates everything with a new light that reveals God's intention for the integral vocation of man, thus orientated the spirit towards fully human solution, Gaudium and Spes. To this point, the Council asks, what does the Church think about men? Which guidelines should be proposed for the construction of the present society? Which is the ultimate meaning of human activity in the universe? Gaudium Spes replies that the people of God and humanity render mutual service so that the mission of the Church shows itself, but for this is profoundly human. And the culture is a mean to reach a truly human level of life. The culture presents an historical and social aspect. That's why we quote about the plurality of culture, because the different way of making use of things, of working, of expressing, of practicing religious, of forming science to cultivate the good, have different styles of life and different scales of value that are different from each man. On the base of this historicized culture, Gaudium and Spes notes that today it is more difficult than in the past to reduce the different disciplines of art and knowledge. So it is duty of the Christian to cooperate so that all the manifestation activity are imbued with the human and Christian spirit. Gaudium and Spes 661 says that in human people and integral there are the value of intelligence, the will, the conscience, fraternity, all based in God that is great and which are in Christ. So the profound root of integral humanism therefore relies just in the wisdom of cross, rightly celebrating in this international symposium. Because with the Incarnation, the Son of God is united in a certain way to every man, and from the common divine vocation of every man comes the possibility to be associated in the way that God knows in the Paschal Mystery. Gaudium Spes 22 says, from the cross of Christ, the enigma of pain and death outside his gospel received life. So here it is the theme of salvation and the ways that are known just to God, who does not question the theme of Christ, the only mediator, but rather exalts the salvific role. So from here the challenge of education to an effective relation between culture and faith. Without it, the great affirmation of the Council on the integral humanism risks to remain a dead letter. The basic culture, says Gaudium Spes 60, is formed from a sufficient quantity of different goods that allow to cooperate with a good on common good. Therefore, we're talking to overcome analphabetism and to cooperate, so to take important decisions in economical, international, national field, just to recognize the right of run to a human culture that is in conformity with the dignity of person without distinction of race, sex, religion, etc. So here we pass to another document at number 7, recognize that to realize the integral humanism, it is necessary in the human society to respect the norm according to which human beings and social groups must be granted the widest possible freedom. Unfortunately, the international community does not care about the protection of human rights among the different. We recall the story of Patrick Zaki, an Egyptian student. He was challenged in Egypt because he was in defense of the Coptic Christian minority in his country. Patrick was arrested on the February the 7th, 1 year ago, and since then is in custody. His trial that has just started faces to end with 5 years of prison. So, from the growing awareness of human dignity arises the need to establish a political order in which the rights of the person are better protected. Gaudium et Spes 73. And in the number 25, they remember that the church and discrimination between the believers and non-believers. So at that time, in 65, if the church was considering the regimes, Marxism regime that were restricting or prohibited the freedom to manifest his own faith, today these rights is still keeping its actuality because facing a new phenomenon that is the one of research of spiritual welfare without referring to a transcendent God, which is very diffused in developed countries, we notice that many, also from the public order point of view, do not favor the possibility that the believers community will develop in a free way and publicly their cult manifestation. There is a kind of a restriction in the private environment, the manifestation of their faith. This would allow to the one that are open to the wisdom of the cross to discover the profound sense of human vocation. There is also another environment of integral ways. The right of women. It's not that the women has to work, but that they can work according to their attitude. So it will be the right of everyone that the participation of women to the cultural life is recognized and promoted. And in this sense, so, Fratelli Tutti, number 23, quoted in Vangeli Gaudium, and declaration about the human brotherhood, signed by Pope Francis at Abu Dhabi in 19. They state the necessity to recognize the right of woman to work and exercise of political rights. But for this, we must work to release the women for the social versions that are contrary to their faith and dignity, to protect from the sexual exploitation, so we must interrupt all this human practice that affect the dignity of women and to work to change the law that prevent women to fully enjoy their rights. So, how it is possible to realize all that? Thanks to the dialogue. Dialogue with the witness, it's the best way for the integrated humanism. Yes, 43, they say the Christian of both cities must try to fulfill their earthly duties, letting themselves to be guided by the spirit of the gospel, because it's up to their conscience, already properly formed, to inscribe the divine law in the life of the earthly city. To this research for truth, there is the witness of a live faith that is formed to recognize the difficulties. The reign of God is not erected with a sword, but is constituted by listening the truth and bearing witness and growing by virtue with love with which Christ exalted the cross. The wisdom of the cross does not take anything to men, but is light and life for freedom. According to Gaudium et Spes, the word is the theatre of the dialogue. With a study, the believers are able to assume their responsibility with the dialogue with the word and with any man with any opinion. But we wonder, which is the word by which the Church wants to dialogue? Gaudium et Spes 3 answers. The whole human family, with context of those realities with which it lives. The world which is the theatre of history of mankind that and bears the signs of man's efforts, his defeats and his victories. The world that Christians believe created and preserves in existence by the love of the Creator. The world fallen under the slavery of sin, but freed by Christ with the cross and resurrection, and destined according to divine purpose to be transformed and to reach its fulfillment. So here, about the human horizon, there is the universal dimension of the wisdom of the cross that is well expressed by Gaudium et Spes. The human pace that arises for the love from the neighbor is the reflect of the peace of Christ. The Son that is incarnated, Prince of the Peace, has reconciliated all men with God by re-establish the unity of all in one people, in one body. He killed his flesh, and in the glory of his resurrection he spread the spirit of Allah in the hearts of men. Other quotations are contained in the number 37 and 38 of Gaudium et Spes. The two dimensions, the eschatological of the wish of the future world, and the present one with the commitment of the Christian family, are co-presence. And Gaudium et Spes is also hinting to Eucharisty as commitment of the future commitment. But of course, there are also some difficulty that the Council does not exclude in this prophetic objective. That is the common commitment to realize the integral humanism. Once again, it is necessary that men can exchange the research of their souls, and all Christians are called to practice the truth of light. Since 1965 to today, the horizon of the human survival has been reduced because of the globalization, with a scandalous disproportion to the access of primary goods that is cause and effects of wars, mass migrations, and also of climate changes. But the path of dialogue remains that of civilization, of life, that is dear to Paul VI, as John Paul II recognized in the message of the Peace Day in 2000. The dialogue is the main tool to realize the civilization of love and peace, and Paul VI has indicated an ideal to inspire the culture, social, political, and economic life of our type. And after 50 years, Pope Francis says the urgent challenge of protecting our common home includes the concern to unite all the whole family in the search of sustainable and integral development, because we know that things can change. The Creator does not abandon us. The human has still the capability to cooperate to build up our common house. We cannot be satisfied with words, we must take action. Central to the new front of the dialogue on environment opened by Pope Francis are the involvement of the international, national and local politics, the transparency in decision-making processes, the dialogue between politics and economics, and human fullness, and between religious and sciences. Now, we cannot find in the Council the term globalization, but our Aetate uses the term on interdependence among people, Nostra Aetate number 1. This opening of the document of the interreligious dialogue are an inclusion with the perspective of the universal brotherhood, to which the document shows the final words of number 5. Inside the religious phenomenon of humanity, there is the Christian religious, since all men are sons of one God, and from here there is an ethic of the boundless love, fight to discrimination, and a strong way, words for Catholics, so that their men and women of peace, so that the spiritual good will improve and they will be the followers of other religions, with 3 precise points: charity, dialogue and cooperation, and witness to faith and Christian life. So, starting from Nostra Aetate, the flows of the dialogue has grown, and thanks to the wisdom of Paul VI that created the Secretariat for Non-Believers in 1964 and promoted the Declaration Nostra Aetate afterwards. The occasions of contact with the followers of other religions have increased, as both at level globally and world level, and also at level of the Commission for the Dialogue for the local churches. The purpose is the promotion of peace and protection of common home. So the Pontifical Council for the Interreligious Dialogue works in close collaboration with the Commission for the Dialogue from local churches. So which are the forms of dialogue that have been developed during those years? The dialogue of life, where people strive to live in a spirit and openness and good neighbor, this sharing their joy and pains. The dialogue of action and works, through which Christians and others believe to collaborate for integral development. And here there is the dialogue for the environment, the commitment for the universal brotherhood, which were already present in the post-concilial magistry, but they've been increased by Pope Francis. And third, and the dialogue of the theological exchanges, and the dialogue of the religious experience, where people rooted in their own religious tradition share their spiritual riches, for example, the prayer, the contemplation, the faith, the seeking of God. In this sense, the monastic interreligious dialogue. So, through this dialogue, we start with Paul VI. We've been talking about the dialogue of the peace, John Paul II, the dialogue of Benedict XVI, And in 50 years, we came to the dialogue of friendship to beat up the bridges of Francis. The virtue of the solidarity of John Paul II that has become, in the biblical and Franciscan language, the universal brotherhood, which has profound roots, conciliar roots. I would like to conclude this presentation with invitation addressed a few days ago to the religious gathered in Bratislava to experience in the church a climate of freedom, creativity. I quote the Pope's dialogue, a church that forms an interior and responsible freedom that knows how to be creative by immersing herself in the history and culture is also a church that knows how to dialogue with the words, which confesses Christ without being one of us, with those who live the fatigue of a religious quest, and even with those who do not believe. She is not selective of a small group. She dialogues with everyone, with the believers, with those who carry an wholeness. So the dialogue is something that makes everyone to be in contact. I think that those last indication of Pope Francis are idoneous to make this commitment really real through the dialogue of the current context of interreligious and intercultural pluralism. I thank you for your attention and I do wish you a good continuation.
Vi ringrazio per l'attenzione e vi auguro buona continuazione.
We are thanking Monsignor Lucio Sembrano for his presentation. It was very important and wise to recall at the center of our topic of humanism, integral humanism and interreligion dialogue, the Second Council and Pope the Sixth, and the Gaudium et Spes, hope and joy, that it's a kind of form that actually lost its actuality, because it gives some data, some indication that's actually over, and actually it's clear from the words of Monsignor Sembrano. So, but it entails thematic and key points, interpretation key points that are extremely important on our topic and that will last longer. And clearly, they are receptive, and there are guidelines actually of thought upon humanity in a complexity, because overall humanity knows that should find unifying ways, paths, because somebody is trying to unify humanity. So we should try to grasp the real dynamics with religious, biblical, theological language that can be words like solidarity, brotherhood, solidarity with creation, and so on. So I'm thinking about Pope the Sixth words that in the end of his council, he thought about the Good Samaritan, the Church as the Good Samaritan, the Christianity as the Good Samaritan, because it has a kind of a glimpse upon humanity, this way of acting. That's why it is important, has been called not only the contents of the last documents on integral documents as brother all, but actually by seeing that in the Council there are some topics that highlights the Easter event. So when I thought, therefore the cross event, and when we are talking about hope and joy, indicates that there is a path that makes the dialogue possible. Not only therefore a theory, but also proposition of whole humanity that is actually integral. And I thought about the last document, Agendas, so where is written, and I'm very stricken by the expression, when there is a Motus Christi, a movement of Christ, the movement, a kenotic movement, a movement of his thought, his person, this moment should turn to be a mind movement, the evangelium, who is bringing the good news, like the Eastern event. We will have other occasions later on to share also your experiences that we have. And right now, I would like to welcome our dear Professor Isabel Varanda, that she comes from Portugal. Good morning, Professor. And she is the Catholic University. She's from Catholic University of Portugal. She's teaching eschatology, theology as well, and from 2010 also in China. She teaches also in China at Macau. She published many books, so we will hear her presentation, which focus on the wisdom of the cross, ecological problems, and the challenges posed to religious and secularized world. The professor will talk in Portuguese, and we will have the relay from Portuguese into English and into Spanish.
Buongiorno. Good morning. Bonjour. Buenos dias. Bom dia. Sinto-me muito privilegiada.
I invite you to participate to the 4th Congress of the Passionists. Thank you very much. Also, I benedict you all. Thank you.
Grazie mille, carissimi Fernando Taccone, pela invitazione. Peço perdão por não poder falar a vossa língua. Deverei falar em português. Agradeço a vossa atenção e a vossa benevolência. Uma experiência de Pentecostes.
The planet Earth and life at the global level are at an historical crossroads dominated by deep and continuous failure in terms of sustainability, both for the planet and for life on the planet, whose failure has reached its peak in the 2020 with a tremendous global disruption upheaval driven by the SARS-CoV virus. The two pandemics, the environmental and sanitary ones, which are currently underway and are expression of the disintegration and collapse of the world, which we represent and contribute to build. It is therefore mandatory to work with a spirit of clear lucidity, the clear mind and reflection, starting from reading and knowledge of the phenomenology of the present time. The ideas put forward in this study mirror such concern. One seek on the one hand to identify in particular the challenges that planetary environmental crisis poses to Christianity and the theological interests acquired by these challenges, and on the other hand to identify the resources of the Christian religions which can be traced back to the global environmental crisis and the secularism at the global level. The first key point concerns the wisdom of the cross, respect for the world with love. Since the beginning, Christianity has been the religion of the incarnation of God, and this is actually the extraordinary distinctiveness upon which it's founded. By quoting the great religious historian Mircea Eliade, such a singular distinctiveness of Christianity lies in the transformation of history into theophany, theophany of incarnation, which patristics sums up in the expression admirable exchange. Admirable exchange brought about by the incarnated Word, and that over the century it has been considered as the miracle of salvation for humanity, the world and history of the fate of the believers, followers, which have been evaluated and praised. The great German philosopher Hannah Arendt sensed with unusual mastery this power of the birth of a new being, capable of starting something new, which carries in itself the promise of renewal of the world, of whose birth in total vulnerability, in total dependence, in total nudity, fill us with joy, amazement, and wonder. Pure miracle that saves the world and our life from routine. The miracle that saves the world is ultimately the factor of birth in which the faculty of acting is rooted ontologically. In other words, it is the birth of new human beings, the new beginning, the action which they are capable of by virtue of being born. Only the full exercise of this capacity can give human being faith and hope. This faith and hope in the world may never have been expressed so briefly and gloriously as in the brief words with which the Gospels proclaim the good news. Clearly, a child was born among us. From the nativity grotto of the new life, a child among us, and from the terrestrial history of Jesus Christ, that begins right there, to the grave of the dead body, and to the Christian religions that the resurrection inspires. An essential span is consolidated that culminates in crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. Lydia George, an extraordinary contemporary Portuguese writer, recently gave a biographical interview on one of the public television channels in Portugal. She remembered when she was a child of her Christmas time, and the child Jesus who appeared at that time in the Nativity. She says, "My desire was to remove the child and take him out of the church, to prevent him from going through that torment. When I realized it was the same being, I have that impulse, and because after all, it took me a long time to realize that he was the same creature at the end of the day, the same creatures. So he was the composer of the universe. Nevertheless, despite the horror of the cross, the fear of suffering, death, and deep compassion innocently felt by Lydia George before the newborn, when she discovered that that child is the behold man, ecce homo, who dies on the cross, this enables us to clarify the evangelical treasure of wisdom preserved by the scriptures, also as to the episode of the cross. Christ on the cross being as an innocent victim for Christians is the reading key for all the promises of salvation that can be found in history. It is a primordial event, it is a hermeneutic key that sustains a phenomenal existence lifespan between incarnation and resurrection, and is the culmination of the incarnation. God has to go to history to come in humility, powerlessness, and poverty. This contradicted everything people had believed about the gods. The life that began in a cave ended on the cross, and there was on the grotto ended on the cross, and there was the final conflict between power and love, idols, and the true God. The primordial and axial character of Christ's cross is based upon this. There is a grave where the body is laid. It represents the end, the desolation, frustration, the estrangement at the beginning of the morning with this back turned to Jerusalem, the place where the terrible events took place. Against all expectation, also for Jesus' own disciples, the cross on which the Logos of the Father is silently located is not really the definitive end of the words, simply emptiness, destruction, and death. The post-Easter reading of events highlights that depth of the cross of the crucified one, a deep thrust of death, at the same time an open cross of life, a deep interiority of the cross, an exteriority contiguous of the cross, to the cross, which is not mere silence, emptiness, and end. We can see here the primordial power of the cross, which does not open on the chaos, onto the chaos or the unspeakable abyss. Contrary, it opens a new place, resistant to projection, occupation, and manipulation, irreducible to phenomenon and empirical visibility, and where the word is still possible, a radically new word. Clear, laude notizia, empowered by the crucified one. In other words, primordial power of the cross and an axial power of the cross by the place of glory that is opened by the cross. The crucified one is alive. This is the central affirmation of the charisma of the apostles. Axial means place of power. The paradox of the cross of Christ is summed up precisely in this primordial and axial power of recapitulation and transformation of the universal experience of agony, suffering, and death. Precisely because the suffering of life is universal, of the human being and of all creation, it is true. Before the extreme suffering of the death, we are as naked, and binds up on the divine being of Christ, coming into the binds us to one of the central claims of the Christian faith, the suffering and death of God humanized on the cross. The suffering of the world is imposed as theological, cosmological, anthropological place. As a result, Christianity cannot devalue, ignore, or desert it without contradicting itself and betraying itself. It can be stated that back to up to the 20th century, Christology insisted on the divine being of Christ, coming into the world to accomplish a totally divine work. In the last decades of 20th century, Christ has begun to be seen effectively in the line of radical solidarity with human history. Joseph Moynihan's monumental Christology takes account of all this evolutionary Christological movement, from the exclusive consideration of Christ's death in the timeless sense of sacrifice and atonement for sin, to the explicit deep incarnation of history, solidarity, and in continuity with suffering, with death, turning apart the human species in the world, and with the cause of all the losers of history. In the present time in which global ecology has become a new historical subject. This trend, anthropological trend and history trend of Christology deepens and extends, although it is still timid. It's turning out to be a cosmology and a theology of the earth, which seem to be more in tune and more up to the profound incarnation of Logos of God. Yes, it is true that to these days Christology has been adopted anthropocentric and therefore reductive approach, but therefore in its essence is a lesser claim of universal reach, which reaches all creation, all creatures at all times, spaces and circumstances. Here is highlighted one of the greatest challenges that Christianity and Christologists face today, and we formulate it as follows. Christianity and Christology, taking into account the multidisciplinary knowledge specific coming from human science and biological science, and but without relying on them, need to be critical, to be reviewed. The anthropocentric category of doctrine, spirituality, and pastoral care, through which we can explore the differentiating enlargement to other forms of life. This open, extensive methodology seems to be asked to be revealed in the way Joseph Monet's wedges of extraordinary expressions. And this is the observatory of the cross, from which a whole creation cross. Observatory of the cross as a starting point. The creation, as is understood by the observatory of the cross, by God, cannot be but a passion of love. I therefore allow myself to propose the symbolic of the open side of Jesus crucified as a Christian observatory of the agonies and wounds in living flesh of the planet, of the human species, and of all creatures in the existential reality of risk, an expression that the Pontifical Council for Life uses in the document published in 2020 on the human community issued in pandemic times. The credibility of Christian epistemology of the phenomenon of the word can only be recognized by the world's religions, by Christianity itself, and by the secularized words, to the extent that is built from the observatory of the cross, which later on I will call it consideratory of the cross. Consideratory of the cross, and through the lens given by the open side of Christ, by his torn body. This shift from the vision of Christ's death, that is mainly sacrificial, to a vision of his death as a sign and effect of his proper ethical responsibility as a subject in history, has the power to awake and mobilize not only believers, but all the people and nations of the world, so that they can look at the world with love, consider the world with love. This is because such an ethical responsibility requires an active and effective positioning alongside the defeated of history, the oppressed, the invisibles, the victims of all form of injustice, and all who are suffering from the cruelty of fate. only this Christian horizon, so which recalls the suffering of Christ, the subversing memory, the dangerous memory, as it's called by Jean-Baptiste Metz, seems to be up to addressing the dramatic public and planetary questions of our time, and seems being able to guide him in the search for an ethical rationality that will renew the face of the earth. Therefore, the elaboration made so far, the cross of the crucified, shows the observability of the cross as a concrete place of possible construction of a new Christian episteme, capable of accompanying the efforts of the science of life and all the wisdoms of the world, and as a cognitive and interpretation place of the extended reality, able to help humanity to renew the earth and life on earth on the basis of a just and sustainable relationship between the living from resources generously offered by plant and animal natures, or either living with the very same nature of symbiotic and reciprocated basils, in order and living for the homeostasis of the planetary ecosystem, putting conscious intelligence at the service of the conscience, not only of conditions that are all more favorable to survival, but also to the service of well-beings, of the good life, of the bien vivre, of all creatures, taking account also the diversity of needs and expectation. Consideration as a methodological and epistemological principle. When this journey is done, it is now important to consider the method without which the observatory of the cross is at risk of alienating the phenomenon of the word and weakening its power of intervention and transformation by becoming irrelevant in current history. This factor, without which the cross observatory is limited to a data collector, is the consideration, is a consideration, and is a term that is already been quoted in other ideas, in previous ideas, in which the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, at a conference published in 1953, wonders about what does thinking mean. We read in the text literally, we learn to think as we focus our attention on what should be considered. We can only think when we love that what is in itself the thing to consider. It should be noted that Heidegger places love as a condition for actually thinking about thing to consider. And Heidegger places love as a condition for actually thinking about the thing to be considered. But what actually is meant by consideration? The term consideration is used in a common language as a formula for delicacy, to express esteem and appreciation for a person. On the negative side, disregard means low consideration. They are both associated with the lack of respect, rudeness, devaluation, trivialization, and lightness. We are particularly interested in the meaning that etymology introduces us. The verb considerare, comes from cum sideris, so genitive of sidus, which designates a constellation of stars. with his help, the French philosopher Corinne Pelanchon, in the Dictionary University de la Langue Française, says that the consideration is the fact of looking at anything, someone with such attention as if they were to examine the position of the stars. So we should highlight it, the prefix cum, that suggests an effort at the same time underlies the connection with ourselves and the knowledge of what is above and what is around us. This idea is a central one and also present in the treatise on consideration by Bernard de Clairval, that it was written between 1149 and 1152 as a letter addressed to Pope Eugenius III, who was his disciple. For Bernardo, consideration is directly linked to piety. And this is also linked to contemplation and specifically to God. However, he wrote, I do not wish to fully identify it with contemplation, because it is rooted in the vision or in the certainty that is known, what is known, and the consideration is an inquisition of the unknown. To the question that Bernardo asked himself about what should the consideration mean, Bernardo answers back with 4 points. What is above you? What is beneath you? What is around you? And what is upon you? The first thing, and that is the consideration of ourselves, is highlighted by Bernardo in other 3 aspects. What are you by nature? What are you by nature? Who are you as a person? And by custom, how are you by customs? Inspired by Bernardo de Clairval, the ethics of consideration developed by the French philosopher Corinne Pelanchon turns to the word. The consideration has a political meaning that comes from the fact that it is essentially a concern for the world. In this light, I hope that the naturally intimate relationship will be clearly, because it is the relationship between the crucified one, the observer of the cross, and the world that the crucified ones consider with love and self-oblative and promising. It is the love with which one observes the world from the cross that allows and justifies the audacy of consideratory neologism. The cross itself as conciliatory of the world with love. World consideration that is extensive, intensive, and deep. In the midst of so much ruin and rubble, that is no longer radically new, but radically enlarged and resists and defies the drive to destruction and death, which today seems to drive the destiny of the planet and the life on the planet that is dealing with the environmental and pandemic and the sanitary pandemic. This image is worth more than 100 words. The event media as swung of mourning was international news. On December 23rd, 2020, 2 swans attempted to fly over the high-speed line connecting Kassel and Göttingen in Deutschland, in Germany. But one of them crashed in some lines, electric lines. I fell on death on the line. The connection was interrupting, and it caused a delay of 50 minutes out of 23 trains, because the authorities were not able to fend off the surviving one, which refused to leave the location, the site. Fires had to use special equipment to remove the two swans from the tracks, and the morning swan was then released in the Furla River. The event symbolizes, in a sense, a whole change of mentality that is underway with regard to the consideration of life and the world. That's a great turn. It should be noted that from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, proclaiming back in 1948, focusing on the human being and his independence, until the Charter, Earth Charter back in 2000, a movement of progressive displacement and enlargement move from the accent given to independent human being to the interdependence one. Moreover, with that declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of Mother Earth, back to 2010, and so the attention given to individual rights will be extended to the rights, to the more ample rights of a larger community of life. Therefore, there is a new transformation, a new critical understanding of anthroposophism, and an extensive and intensive enlargement. These are some of the remarkable documents that reflect the change which took place back in the 20th century. Therefore, from the valorization of isolated individuals to the recognition of intrinsic belonging to the entire Earth community and cosmos. Pope Francis had his personal value with the encyclical Laudato Si. He recognizes the intrinsic value of all creatures and their interdependence. And this is a first step, but of immense value. Francis' effort towards an ecological epistemology illuminated by the Christian gospel culminates in the idea of an integral ecology, which translated at the same time the recognition of the value of all creatures and the recognition that all creatures are connected and interdependent, as well as the scope of everything that concerns the human, so the religious, social, environmental, cultural, political, spiritual, and daily life dimensions. However, the encyclical does not aim to highlight the intrinsic recognition of human affiliation to Earth, belonging to Earth, nor does it advances the inevitable commitment to the body of Earth, nor the consideration of the human imago Dei is an element of this body, of the same nature, and with a unique responsibility. The fact is that practical awareness is developing, planetary common sense, which recognizes that we are at the same time children of God, children of the stars, and children of the earth. We are sharing a community of being and destiny with creation. We are part of nature, and nature is an intrinsic part of us. Contrary to what the word environment suggests, which puts nature around and therefore outside the human being. Yes, human salvation and cosmic salvation are inseparable, interdependent, and the point means that this recognition will not collide with divine affiliation, but it would actually be embodied by the incarnation of the Word of God, the Creator, which deepens and extends to the cross. God Himself becomes flesh, entering the extraordinary chain of biological and cosmic life to lead every creature to participate, fully participate in divine life. In the process of recepting the encyclical, these values is very much the following value is very much highlighted. So the extension of the saving horizon to all creatures and the process of creative evolution, and thereby softening the anthropocentric classical anthropocentric orientation of Christian theologies. Then there is a new rethinking of the theology of creation, soteriology, eschatology, and take into account of the contemporary knowledge of different scientific disciplines, up to get to the intrinsic bonds among all creatures. The objective to have an echo, a unison with the cry of the poor of the earth. If there is, therefore, a cry of the poor earth, should be with the unisons of the poor of the earth. So if there is an epistemology that has to be developed, must be based on the recalling of these cries that is set up by the Observatory Consideratory of the Cross, which is undoubtedly situated on the margins and the existential abysses from which the planetary movements and for social justice emerge today. John Floyd, Me Too, Camiros, migrants, refugees, indigenous population, Afghanistan's, areas of sacrifice, southern epistemologies. It seems to be it has sense the recommendations of Michael Serres that suggest that it is necessary to stop reducing the real to the terrified images. But likewise, it is needed. It is necessary to keep in mind that, as George Steiner recalls, being can also be conceived as pure terror. The concept of integral ecology from the perspective of LS could, in my opinion, articulate the concept of deep ecology, developed by Bill Duval. Therefore, we are associating the integral the concept of integral ecology from the should be integrated. So, according to this articulation, the integration of the vast with the deep ecology, together with the foundational pillars of Christian theology of creation and salvation, are introduced a new thesis of preferential investigation. In other words, the integral ecology means deep integral eco-theology. deep integral eco-theology. And this takes into account not only the extension to all creation, but also essentially the deep incarnation in the body of creation. And let us understand the to discover and tune into the Christian mystery of the incarnation to the cross. And this is the novelty of the religious geography, started exactly by Jesus of Nazareth. It was inaugurated by Jesus of Nazareth, from heaven to earth, from high to depth, from the most transcendent high transcendent to the immanent altruism, from metaphysics to introphysics. But it remains an entire epistemology to be built from this very basic and primordial intuition latent in Christian tradition that was brought into light from Laudato Si, and from the dialogue with the secular thought and with the new historical subjects, among them, for example, ecology, environmentalism, biotechnology, quantum physics, and nanotechnology. In other words, it should be built a theological epistemology that should develop a theology of the earth, beginning by a critical evaluation of the strength, both of the strengths and weak points of theology over the centuries. It was marked by ambivalences, ambiguities, anti-ecological dualisms, along with extraordinary potentials and ecological intuitions. Secondly, this should be based on scientific knowledge, and in particularly evolutionary biology and neurosciences, which provide information and dynamic updates about life, and which can be of great help to the Christian theology of creation and salvations of the 21st century without actually relying on them, depending on them. Now, let's look at the concrete example from neurosciences. Antonio Damasio, a renowned neuroscientist, Portuguese neuroscience, and is living in the USA, published a work in 2020 entitled Feel and Know, On the Road to Consciousness, from which he highlighted the evolutionary review that the author makes of life from the most elementary forms to reaching consciousness at a level so far that we know, to the current knowledge, only the human species actually had yet access to. And he writes, in the field of life history in which we find ourselves today, we can identify three distinct and consecutive evolutionary phases. The first phase had its peak, the being, and this phase corresponds to the ability to detect. The second is dominated by feeling. The feeling that is built through feelings and not just with the mere possibility of detecting what surrounds us. It is interesting to note that the third phase is defined by the process of knowledge, cognition, and consciousness. And Damascus explains us that in all contemporary human being, something similar is taking place in these three phases in the same sequence. Sense and hear. In other words, feel and feel. In other words, the concrescence of detecting and feeling
do detectar e
evolves
de
to
sentir,
the excrescence
evolui
of
para
conscious human
do humano
consciousness.
Este
This
estágio
stage
de
of
consciência
consciousness and
e de
knowledge in which
saber,
these
em que está
feelings
presente
and
o
creative reasons
sentimento
are
e o
present
raciocínio e o
allow
criativo,
us
permite
to reach
o
the goals
objetivo da
of survival,
sobrevivência.
which is
Nota
a common
que
goal
o
to
objetivo da
all
sobrevivência
forms
é
of life,
objetivo comum a todas as formas de vida.
thanks to
Mas a
which the
espécie
human
humana
species reach out the
acrescenta-lhe
well-being
o
and
objetivo
happiness.
do
And Damasio
bem-estar
adds
e da
the
felicidade.
goal of survival
E
and the
Damasio
dictates
reforça
of the
o
homeostasis,
objetivo da sobrevivência e os
namely
ditames
of the
da
equilibrium, are still
homeostasia,
in
ou
place
seja, do
today,
equilíbrio,
both
continuam
in
em
the
vigor
single-cell
ainda hoje,
creatures
tanto em
as
criaturas
the bacteria,
unicelulares,
as well as in us
como
as
as
human
bactérias,
beings. But that kind of
como em nós.
intelligence behind
Mas
that
o
process
tipo de
is not the
inteligência
same
por detrás do processo é
as in the
diferente
isolated
nas células
cells and the
isoladas
human
e no
cells.
ser
In these
humano.
elements of evolutionary
Nestes
biology,
elementos da
I think we can
biologia
spot
evolucionária,
some clues to
penso
help
que
to
se
understand
encontram
what is at
pistas
the
para
root
ajudar a
of
perceber
the
o que está
progressive
na
disaffiliations
raiz da
of human species,
desfiliação
both
progressiva
from
da
the
espécie
earth
humana,
and other
quer
forms
da
of
terra,
life.
quer
I
das
suggest,
outras formas de
therefore,
vida.
the
Processo
following
ao qual
consideration.
as religiões
The
monoteístas,
human
e
being has
concretamente o
deactivated
judaísmo e o
the practical
cristianismo, não são
conscious
estranhos.
atrophy and explain
Pondo à
the
vossa
basic
consideração
competencies
a
of the being.
hipótese seguinte:
So we
o ser
let the
humano
practical conscious atrophy
desativou, deixou
in
atrofiar
sensing
a
or
consciência
detecting
prática
what is
e
common in all
explícita
forms of life
das
and the
competências
feeling,
básicas
common
do
feeling
ser,
common to most
detectar,
forms of life.
comum
Thus,
a todas
in
as
this
formas de
process,
vida.
we
feeling,
distinctively being
comum
apart
à
from other
maior
life
parte
forms
das formas
with
de
the
vida,
clear-cut separation.
separando-se
So these
assim
distances,
das outras
together with the
formas.
lack
Este afastamento,
of
juntamente
conscious
com a
experiences,
falta
of
de
conscious experience
experiência
of the basic
consciente
activities
das
of detecting
atividades
and feeling,
básicas do
operations
detectar
that
e do sentir,
we are carrying out
operações que,
constantly.
no entanto, estamos a processar
Therefore, this
constantemente.
detecting,
Dizia, este afastamento,
this lack of
esta falta de
conscious
experiência consciente
experience
das atividades
is
básicas
at
do
the
detectar e do
root
sentir,
of
está
disaffiliation
na raiz da
of
desfiliação
mankind from the
do
cosmic
humano,
body
do corpo
and the body of
cósmico
the
e do
earth,
corpo
and at
da
the
terra,
very root of
e na
Gnostic
raiz das
drifts
derivas
and
gnósticas
dualistic
e das
philosophies and theologies
filosofias e
which have been
teologias
accompanying the history of
dualistas que
Christianity from the
acompanharam
birth
a
to our
história do
days.
cristianismo desde o
We
seu
do know
nascimento
that these
até
drifts
aos nossos
were
dias.
and still
Sabemos
are
que estas derivas
facilitators and
foram
promoters
e são
of the
facilitadoras e
diabolization
promotoras da
of matter,
diabolização da
with all
matéria,
the
com
distortions
todas
that
as
come from
repercussões que daí advêm,
for
quer para a
anthropology and for
antropologia, e para a
spirituality,
espiritualidade,
and for the
quer para a
consolidation of
consolidação
human
de uma
mentality and
mentalidade
exploration
humana de
and
exploração
domination
e
rather
de
than
dominação,
empathy and
em
consideration.
vez de
In brief,
empatia
this
e
separation
consideração.
of consciousness of the human being, of human species,
separação
from
da
the basic
consciência
functions
da
of life
espécie
in general,
humana, das
allow
funções
the human being
básicas da vida em
to
geral,
instrumentalize
permitiu ao ser
other
humano
life forms
a
and the
instrumentalização
planetary
das outras
ecosystem.
formas de vida
We
e do
overvalue
ecossistema planetário.
separation from belonging.
Sobrevalorizamos a
The human
separação
reason
à pertença.
over
A razão humana
non-explicit
sobre as
intelligences.
inteligências não
We see
explícitas
where it has brought us relations of domination and exploitation. In any case, in this first part of the 21st century, we started to perceive changes in terms of speculation and sensitivity towards the reconsideration of belonging, of the bonding, empathy with all creation. This movement is brilliantly expressed by Corinne Peluchon when he writes, "It is by deepening the knowledge that has of itself and as a carnal being, and making the experience of its vulnerability, its finitude, its fallibility, and by exploring the feeling in its dimension, empathic dimension, as well as in the primitive layers that they live, then the subject experiences belonging to the common world and feels the depth of bond by unity in with other living beings, human and human, and to the whole generation. It seems very possible to us that our time begins to awaken that what we might call a planetary and cosmic instinct of life, which united us in what is most intimate and bring us to the founding experience, is an intrinsic connection among all creatures. And it's interesting to know that this perspective has been already brilliantly understood by Father Cappadocio Basilio of Caesarea, who, in one of his homilies on the Hexameron, explained, quote, "God closely binds by the law of the indissoluble friendship in communion and harmony to whole creation." This is not really precisely what actually expresses and illuminates the mystery of incarnation of God's Logos to the cross. And I reinforce the question with which I conclude this presentation of mine. And I ask you, really, thank you, by asking you, is really this the specific contribution of the Christian religions in the secularized world in terms of the reconsideration of the ecological crisis in order to restore the deep integral planetary ecosystem here? Pope Francis does not ignore such challenges. He himself insists on them and highlights one again by saying that the challenges lies in taking the place that we are expect to have, means the generation of restoration. To get to this place, we have to understand the historical mission within the secularity of the world and recognizing it as an integrated reality into the universe of revelation and salvation, and consequently taking into account the modes of incarnation, all the questions that are addressing the existence in this world. And this is also really the place that we should be, in which the responsibility of the religion in the secularity of the world extends to what that by definition is not grasped by science, technology, economics, and which turns human being to participate to the cosmos itself, and all creatures in their own identities. And here I conclude by saying that throughout the millennia, the religions of the world among Christianity have produced immense reserves of energy, passion, love, empathy, kindness, beauty, consideration, and wisdom. All this must be still there somewhere. Thank you very much. Ma ero spenta. Ma scusate, ero spenta.
No.
Questo nostro applauso è stata appunto la nostra risposta alla interessantissima relazione della professoressa Maria Isabel Pereira Baranda. La ringraziamo.
So there are many subjects with many questions and of course so many stimuli. At this very moment we have a break. It's 11 o'clock. And we have a 30 minutes break, and so we shall meet at 11:30 to start the new dialogue and deepness and sharing. Thank you. It's time, it's 11:30.
Grazie.
Once again, if you can, we can take our seat so that the event can restart. Any technical difficulties? I don't think so.
Bene, iniziamo. Iniziamo perché ecco, chi ci deve essere c'è nell'aula e gli altri sono collegati in via streaming. E dunque ancora una volta vi saluto voi che siete presenti nell'aula e anche coloro che sono collegati. Abbiamo ascoltato questa mattina le due relazioni, la prima del Monsignor Sembrano Lucio sulla sapienza della croce, promozione dell'umanesimo integrale, e poi abbiamo ascoltato la relazione della
So we start now because
professoressa Varanda
we have the people that have to be here, they are here. So I want to greet all of you, the ones that are here and the ones that are connected. We have been listening to this morning to the two lectures, the first of Professor Sembrano Luce about the wisdom of the cross and the promotion of integral humanism. And then we heard the lecture of Professor Baranda about the wisdom of the cross, the ecological problem and challenges posed to religious. Professor Baranda posed different interesting neologisms, not only in Italian but also in other languages, just as the consideratory of the cross refer to Heideggerman and Bernard de Clairvaux, with the invitation to an open theology that takes challenges and is able to be open to an eco dimension. So in this very moment, we can intervene. Just a proposal of the first and the second paper. I'm sorry that Professor Sembrano is not here, but our intervention must not be necessarily something as questions, but just as integration or consideration that one is willing to do as to the subject that we are dealing that are very important, interesting. And sharing the important experiences so to make a thematic mosaic of this morning. So in this moment, I would like to open this moment of brotherly sharing. We are in the room of Lateran University. This does not mean that we have to go on the theoretical speculative thought. We want to share. We want to take profit of the scholars, but we want also to talk about life, as Pope Francis says, and to try the stimuli where we are and where we live. If you want, anyone wants to speak, has to come here, or there is a microphone. So you can talk now. The first person, please mention your name. Luis Oviedo dell'Antoniano. So there are two questions. So Padre Lippi will talk first, and then the second will be yours. Something I would like to tell you, since we have simultaneous translation, let's try to talk in a way by which the translator can do a better work and not to talk too fast. I would like to start to agree with what my friend Zach has said. I don't want to go higher up and make speculation, but I want to make my thought, which is very positive indeed. So I want to congratulate and thank. To thank also because by noticing all this field in which I'm not very inside, he gave some distinctions that clarify. And the questions I would like to pose, I would like to quote Romagnotto, the creation that is paying for the pains of the delivery. Teilhard de Chardin, about the thought of his thought. But one of the things that I've thought, in all this cultural passage opening, can you hear? Opening towards a new culture, so also a new theology. Well, in all this passage, I was pleased, and I think that it has been important that a woman has been talking about it, because I think that the male approach is higher, so it's as to dominion and manipulation. So we must go beyond. We must come out of it. It's not easy at all. It's all the Western culture has been structured in this way. So I think it has been very important that the woman has been talking, because she's near to life, to the feeling, not only to know the things, but to feel them, and to the empathy. So all this opening concerning an anthropological centrality that could have some merits had been exaggerated by losing some other important aspects. So I would like to thank, I don't want to go into further detail, but I think that more than a proposal of a conception of the reality, she has invited us to get into a work that has to grow in the future by starting from the reality in which we are. Thank you, Father Lippi. Thank you. Well, now we have the first question.
Motivi teologici come incarnazione e motivi di sensibilità dell'ecologia integrale. Due questioni. La prima è se lei sarebbe d'accordo con lo spostamento che stiamo assistendo in questi ultimi anni dei temi medioambientali a questioni di sostenibilità, che è un concetto molto più largo che include, e che magari questo concetto di
Luis Oviedo of the Antonianum of Rome. I appreciated your lecture and your attempt to link theological reason as interaction and also sensitivity of the integral ecology. Two questions. The first, if you agree with the placement that we are seeing in this moment of the environment theme, sustainability, which is a wider concept that includes more. This concept would be nearer to the integral ecology, the one proposed by Pope Francis, etc. So I don't know if it would be better, also from a theological point of view, to realize, to take into account this development. The second question concerns which is the contribution of the Christian faith to theology, and more the theology of cross in this effort, this program for sustainability, because some voices think that it is very little from the religious faith. What we can offer is very little. So how can we offer? Thank you. Thank you for the questions. She apologized because she can't speak in Italian or in other languages. It is important to distinguish two questions, environment and ecology. She thinks that the question of sustainability is connected with the question of ecology. Environmental question with the environmental question. Nevertheless, the task of religions must be considered into the field of ecology. Ecology is the equilibrium of all the creatures. They are interconnected. We are at different levels. common man, the common citizen, the believer, must have this care for sustainability. But the commitment of the Christian faith goes beyond. And this morning, Anthropoceno has been mentioned just as a new era, a new period, a geological new period. In which men can provoke relationships which are irreversible. From the geological point of view, that is a change which is profound into the natural reality. From the point of view of the professor, religious and Christianism has to find its role the Second Vatican Council was open to all the world, but the world hasn't closed into the church. And the church has been open to the world, while the world has been enclosed towards the church, to the opening of the church. It is necessary to find a lot of humbleness just to find our place into the world. Because all religions, and also Christianism, are religions that are prosecuted, let's say. The world, generally speaking, is not interested in what the religions can say. So it is enclosed more and more. And above all, because theology inside all sciences is considered irrelevant. Above all for its own language, the language that it uses. And in certain way, Christianism has, let's say, has gone back as irrecognizable.
This is a sentence. From the point of view of the incarnations to the cross, all this can be an interesting space for an anthropology that is concerned and focusing on today's world. The cross is a culmination of the cross is the culmination of the incarnation. because Jesus and the Nathars is rooted profoundly. And this cross belongs to us exactly as Jesus of Nazareth manifests the incarnated reality. And this is actually the reply to the questions raised by the Antonian professor. As concerning Professor Lippi, more or less he commented the presentation, saying that it was a positive presentation. He thanks because you were a lady who spoke, and this we're following the speaker. He was focuses on the anthropological aspect, and so this is a presentation of this professor as an invitation for the future for a humanity that's more profound. Thank you for your presentation, for your intervention, Father Lippi. Are there any other people who would like to pose their questions? Hello, this is Sandra. I'm a lay. I'm a woman and I'm coming from Caravate. I had a choir that is not like the one of last evening, a liturgical one. And last summer, during the summer, I wrote a meditation on Laudato Si, that is titled the Laudato Sings. And I used the scriptures and the song and the songs to get to the objective. And of course, the culmination was the one where the man rebirth. And if you look at the Genesis 1:26, and I quote, you as scholars, you use the word quote, God said, make the man according to our image, according to our likeness. Who can dominate it on fish and cattle? The word domini represents a problem, because the readers who read dominare, domini, mastering, actually here there is not delivering the idea of domination, but it's more the likeness, the making somebody alike. Domini makes to offer their own services, considering the rest of the world. Therefore, turning to be a slave. So, having a glimpse onto the planet that is a more fatherly glimpse, a fatherly approach. Thank you very much for your intervention. I really apologize that I cannot speak. I'm really from my heart. I cannot speak into Italian or in other languages, but we are like feeling in a family. So, can I talk? This is not a systematic and elaborate theology. We have make the man we see the man as the last one to be created. Not because it's the most important, but because it represents the one who needed, who's the one that has more need help and is most vulnerable. All creatures prepare themselves to welcome him. So all creatures prepare themselves to welcome, to care for the man that is the more weakness, and the invitation for the man-like humanity to be more humble. And that is the feature that is more needed feature. Here we can also see and justify the term dominare, mastering, dominating. And the exegesis and theologies, systematic theology, really focus very much on this term dominating, to dominate. So we do not have to go through the exegetic development of the word. I apologize to the theologists that are present here today because they might disagree on what I'm stating. We can all together we make a sum up of all the different interpretations of the exegesis, of historical and critical and interpretative exegesis. If we read free reading and there's no ban on it, we have the case in which the creator is together with other creatures, and by saying we make the man according to our image and likeness, therefore namely image of God, and according to image of other creatures, not only limited to the image of God. So therefore we find out that there is an intrinsic element which binds with the material things. So there is an intrinsic relation with the terrestrial reality. And we do know that the Gnostic movements at the beginning of the Christianity, about the second century after Christ, highlighted the spirit and deprised the matter. The religious movement, and therefore afterwards we had the religious movements who escape the world. And why did it occur? Because the world was evil, was bad. And Our Lady speaks at the end of our praying of the earth with a negative labeling of materia, of the matter, with a negative perspective of the matter. Who created a distance between man and the other creatures. And this enabled us to turn us as emperors, as domina on other creatures, as masters over other creatures. But we can be and are image of God, and precisely in the womb of creation, in the center of creation. I hope that I was able to transfer what that I help you in replying your question.
Una pregunta muy sencilla, simplemente para corroborar dos campos de conocimiento diferentes. Le quisiera preguntar.
I wanted to ask, how can we connect the speech of Bonaventura with the Portugal, with the effort in the world, Latin America, the rest of the world, with his ideological speech? But with the adventure of all sense, and
la domanda fatta è come si può relazionare il pensiero di Buonaventura in Chiesa Santa con la epistemologia del mondo.
Grazie della
domanda.
Bonaventura is a Portuguese sociologist, is very important. That works direct with all the problems of the south of the world. He knows very well those realities just because he embodies the cultural context of those countries of the south. He talks of an invisible line, let's say a risk. And this, in his thought, makes a difference between the north and the south. The south, just as people, are of second class. And I'm convinced, definitely, that the path is the incarnation of the pain and of the wounds of the world. I don't know how to do, I don't know. we are in a privileged field. We are rather privileged, and in this context, well, by this we can reflect about the sorrows of the words. My proposal is the Conservatory of the Cross. This is the only path that gives credibility in today's world. I don't know what to do. I stress it again, this. But it is necessary to be visible and make visible those which is not visible. To give voice to the poor earth and to the poor of the earth. I think that here in Rome there are too many bells. We have to ring the bells, not of death, but we have to ring the bells that are joyful. For those that cannot and can't even talk. We must be those that ring the bell of the churches, and the spiritual and theological language is rather metaphorical and also analogic. They say poetic. We must not be afraid of the language that is done with love. How can we say that God is love if we cannot put our heart in this love that we mention? I don't know if I answer to the question. Pope Francis said in Re di Puglia, there is a cent-yard of the First World War, and he made an homily in this cemetery and said that mankind needs to cry. And he said, it is time to cry. So we have to learn to cry, because to cry is connected with compassion. We cannot be afraid. I think that the path of Christianism today is compassion. And to learn how to cry and to make this discovery that we are able to cry. I apologize for talking the way I am doing now. but this is a part of the Christian faith that we have silenced, we have put in silence. If we look at the cross, you can cry. And the cross of Christ is touching us. All the creature on cross, not only man, not only the human being, have their dignity just to receive our compassion. The path of theology is an open path, rather intensive and extensive. We cannot be anthropocentric. That's all. Thank you for this question, for this answer. I see that Padre Battaglia has the microphone.
Father Battaglia from Antenonio. I'm Father Vincenzo Batallo from the Antonian Pontifical University. Some considerations. I'm referring to the first presentation. I will start by saying that from the narration of the Genesis emerged the complacency of God for His creation, and the text quote says, God saw there was something good, it was something very good. So we know that good means also beautiful. So the complacency of God, of His own work. And now I give you some short notice. This implies that there is an affections towards the creation, and for sure this consideration we all agree upon towards all His creatures, and placed at the center the man and the woman. Elements of the cross theology that emerged from the presentation of our professor, they are really extraordinary from Professor Varanda were extraordinary. And then will I highlight a couple of things. First of all, the sensitiveness from God that is translated into participation and passion of God to the human history, covered to the most suffering events. So the affections of God reaches His climax in the Incarnation Mystery, which reaches His fullness in the cross experience that, of course, end with the resurrections. Therefore, in that theology that is dialogue with human sciences, it's more and more needed to consider the Jesus of Nazareth affections. It's a sensitiveness that is actually the human translation according to the revelation of the God sensitivity, and this is a human characteristic. That very perfections belongs only to Jesus of Nazareth. What does it mean? It means, proceeding in my reasoning, that clearly theology today must deepen more and more the salvation and revelation aspect of the bodiness of Jesus of Nazareth, that is directly planted in the heart of history, and is so well planted that actually only he, Jesus of Nazareth, can reach out the most outlish suburbs of sufferances that are actually due to sin. From this point of view, the humanity that transfer the bodiness of Jesus has a determinant value for the integral humanism. And I would like to add, always referring to the first presentation, that we actually have to go deeper into the feature of the character of Jesus of Nazareth and his functions, our Lord, the brothers of our soul, because the aspect of the universal brotherhood must come from the relations that God has with all human beings, all creatures. But trying to understand better the fact that the Jesus of Nazareth is the brothers of everybody and is the first of all. Today we are talking about our Virgin Lady, as our sister. And last consideration, I'm thanking our professor Pereira Varanda. There are some patristic roots. I see there are some patristic roots because Ireneo of Lyon, for example, he speaks about the cross in the light of the Ephesians book by quoting 4 dimensions: height, breadth, depth, etc. And he said that the cross of God is imprinted in the earth in these 4 dimensions, and this means, and I confirm what you have stated, that so we cannot but thinking about the earth, about the ecology, on everything you mentioned this morning, in the light of the mystery of the cross, because only the mystery of the cross can reach out all the depths and heights and loftiness of God. Thank you very much. Thank you, because you explain clearly what actually me as a professor was not able to do. I comment on your comment because you didn't raise a question, but you make a consideration. And I thank you the reference that you made to Erione. And I would like to go deeper because I do not know well this aspect, and of course matches pretty well for what to the topic I presented this morning. The Genesis states that God saw in the human beings goodness. We are used to what is beautiful or what is good, or beautiful, like it's a wonderful thing. But this not affect only human beings. Instead, affects all creatures that are created, because to all creatures God said beautiful, good, and wonderful. Pardon me, but for the man, for the mankind, is not important to think that God says very good. The superlative doesn't make any difference between the mankind, man and woman, and the other creatures. We are not less son of the God, of God. We are perceiving that feeling that we are the brothers of the other creatures. And we always do know that we are different in terms of levels. We are not all equal on all the same footage. Therefore, I reiterated, quoted Damasio and its neuroscience, and he explained the strength of conscience and knowledge and wisdom, and up to now is a feature that specific to of the human beings. And it's also necessary to think what unites to the other creatures without thinking of the same biological footing, the same biological differences that are between us and the other creatures. I do think that we don't have to fear, we shouldn't be scared. That we are flesh, a core of the earth, because the new earth, the new heaven, is under progress, is building in progress. It's a continuum. It's always transforming itself, and we cannot live without ourselves. Nevertheless, our preoccupation is huge, and the possibility that we might extinguish the life on the earth could be extinguished. It's a real question. It's a real aspect. It's a real topic, and here is not a faith matter, but it's an objective one. In this sense, Christianity entails an historic mission that is fundamental. Of placing itself where actually the cross speaks aloft, means the place of the Christian. The Julia Christian is a psychoanalyst from France, and she says, Julia Christian, that the Christianity is far away from the crosses of the world. Therefore, she thinks that is the perfect contradiction. The Christian is born on the cross, and then in his Christian life, he get aside, he get far from his cross. And because why we are here next to the cross? This is my personal problem. The capability, what Pope Francis says. And so my possibility is what Pope Francis said is the suburb, periphery. And there we can find the mystery of incarnation to the cross. I do know that there are many others that would like to pose some questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. We have to get to the end of it, and we have conclude our working session. We would like to thank all that with them presentations or questions created such a sharing space, and in particular we would like to thank our Professor Varanda, who was together with us and who replied to the questions. Now we have our break, and then at 15 o'clock we will go on with our program. We will see there is a question, as you can see, the mystery of suffering, obstacle or path to the search for wisdom in religions. And then we will have our language sections, Italian, English, Spanish, and French, with presentations that are extremely interesting, as we can read in the program. Therefore, we would like to warmly wish you a fruitful, nice, relaxed break, and then we will see back at 15 p.m. Thank you.